In Masechtas Avodah Zarah, Daf Lamed Daled Amud Beis, right at the top, it speaks about a certain type of fish which was sold called a chilak. And it explains this type of fish basically didn't have fins and scales on them when they were young. However, they would develop fins and scales later on as they grew up. They were very small fish, little tiny small fish. It says in general you can't eat these fish because usually they're caught in schools, or you can't buy these fish, I should say, from a non-Jew, because they would be fished in massive schools since they were so small. And since they didn't have fins and scales, it's difficult to identify, some non-kosher fish between the kosher ones. So you would catch a bunch of these little tiny fish, and none of them would have fins and scales. Most of them would be kosher because they would develop fins and scales later. However, there'd be some non-kosher fish which looked very, very similar that would be caught within the mix. And because of that, that would mean, that's why you can't buy, just buy them willy-nilly. However, Rabbi Yehuda ben Gamliel says, in the name of Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel, that the chulak, the chilak of a professional is allowed. The chilak of a professional is allowed. And because of that, or I should say, the reason for this is because professionals are able to make the distinction between which ones are kosher and which ones are not. Even though they both don't have fins and scales, they could tell different signs about which one's correct and wrong. And in fact, it says they would specifically, the Rashi and Meiri bring down, they would actually specifically pull out, the bad, the bad ones, the non-kosher ones. It explains because they would have an unpleasant flavor and odor to them, the treif ones, the non-kosher little fish. And so they would remove it from the batch, because otherwise if you leave it in the batch will get spoiled. So even the kosher fish would start to, will go afoul if you've left them there. So first, they had the expertise to be able to tell the difference, and second, they had a reason to want to remove the non-kosher fish. So because of that, you could buy, even from a non-Jew, as long as he's an expert he's an expert fisherman, and a professional, you're able to buy this batch of fish from him. So today is actually Hilchus Kashrus, and I was thinking, what's our lesson in Avodah Hashem? Everything which we see in life, we have to learn a lesson in Avodah Hashem, and especially and specifically when we learn Gemara, it's very relevant to us. So obviously there's some beautiful halachas about kashrus here, which is what we're talking about, but there's always a spiritual root to everything. It says in fact, it says the spiritual root is kind of what it's all about, in fact, which is why we deal with, every type of question, what's allowed, what's permitted, and theoretical cases in Judaism and in the Gemara, specifically because we're talking to that spiritual root, which is the important part. So since today is Hilchus Kashrus, so we have to learn something from this. So to me, I think that, if you look at our lives, we always have schools of fish roaming around in our lives, which are our actions. Whatever we do, creates a little fish. Why? Because all of our actions have reactions, and then those reactions have further reactions that then, just like a little fish, it might be small, but it's swimming around on its own, and God knows what it could eventually develop and grow up into and become. And a lot of times it moves on its own, where you're not able to actually control where it goes. We do actions, and then the results. We're not really in control of the results. Where Manis Friedman famously says, we only get to choose what we do. You don't get to choose the outcomes. He says, bank robbers, which get stuck on the highway in traffic, they're still bank robbers. They're just bad bank robbers. You could choose to shoot somebody. You don't choose to kill him. Whether he dies or not, that's up to God. So everything which we do in life creates a little fish, and for the most part, everything which we do in life should hopefully, we're creating good fish, kosher fish, correct fish which swim and grow to develop fins and scales and have a good taste and a good odor, unlike non-kosher fish, which have a bad taste and a bad odor. But it's hard to tell at the beginning of something. It's hard to tell when we're starting something new or doing an action that it's in an infant stages, whether it's good or bad. You won't know. Just like the fish, both don't have fins and scales at the beginning, and very hard to tell. So what should we do? How are we supposed to, in terms of actions, how should we know if something's right or wrong? Now this is where you go to a professional. What's the professional? The professional is a Mashpia. This is where a Mashpia comes in. A Mashpia comes in, and he's there. What's his job? He's going to root out all the unpleasant flavor within our, to make sure the unpleasant smell and flavor of the trephus, of the non-kosher fish, doesn't ruin the whole batch, doesn't ruin you, make you angry and miserable and depressed inside. Negative actions and the results of negative actions, it erodes our soul, when we take them. And it's, hence Jewish guilt. But that's really what a job of a mashpia is. The job of a mashpia is to have to look at your actions, which it's hard to discern what's right and what's wrong. It's supposed to guide you to extract all the non-kosher ones from within the batch. And then you can only have a good, healthy, kosher school of fish in your psyche and in your soul. A little lesson from Masechtas Avodah Zarah. Good Yom Tov.